host, Sabrina Salvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. All right. Hey, guys. Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you are new, I want to let you know that Revolutionary Blackout Network is a part of Sabby Sabs podcast. You can catch me there on Thursdays for the Roundtable and Friday for the Sabby Show. And you can catch me here Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. Quick shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, and Twitter. And I want to give a quick shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Let me go ahead and share that. Thank you guys so much. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories: members, Sabby, Sabsters, Sabinators, and Ultimate. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate all of your support. All of their names are listed here, and you can see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen. All right, so Professor Reed will be here in a bit. I want to go ahead and give shout outs to people in the chat. So let me go ahead and do that. Shout out to Tony Plow, says, Adolph, this is going to be great. Thanks so much, Tony. Greetings, Jared R, says Tony Plow 100%. Shout out to Hannah G, says Adolph Reed. Joe OWS says, a gentleman and a scholar. Welcome, Dr. Reed. Whoops, sorry, I just got a message. Shout out to Norman Keena, says, may the village pump strike 12. I don't know what that's about. But welcome. Shout out to Malik, says, hey, everyone. Hello, Malik. Greetings, Notori, says, Sabby. What's going on, Saul? I see a smiley face and a smiley love face. Shout out to Angela, says, hello to the Sabby Show. Greetings, Delthea Simmons, says, hey, everybody, yet another unhappy night. I don't want thoughts. I don't want prayers. I want change. Yes, I did briefly hear about the shooting in Texas. It's really sad. Shout out to Eric T, who's a Sabby member, says, hi there, all. What's going on, Where Pilgrim, says, hey, everybody. Hello to you. Shout out to the Purple Circle, says, get these likes up, people. Yes, guys, don't forget to hit the like button. I know sometimes I do forget to tell you that, so go ahead and hit that like button. Shout out to Terry Conley, says, good evening, fam. What's going on? I almost clicked on myself. That's funny. What's going on? Trish says, hello, smile at Eric T. Red. Shout out to Kenshi Jones, says, happy Tuesday, boo. Happy Tuesday to you as well. What's going on? Gamer for Life says, hello, gamer. How are you doing? Greetings. I almost clicked on the same name. Greetings, Anthony, sends a smiley face. Shout out to Niki's World, says, hello, everyone. What's going on? Yasmin says, happy Tuesday to Gamer. Gamer, I told you you're always popular in the chat. Shout out to Leroy, who's a Sabby member, says, hello again, my comrades. Hope you're okay. Peace. And I want to make sure I click. Did I get oh, no. What's going on? Sabby Sabs says, yay. Hope everyone's having a good day. Shout out to Hugo, says, so catchy. LOL. Hugo's also a Sabby member. Greetings all. I want to go ahead and take those comments on Rockfin, Eric, because I think there's already comments on Rockfin. Thanks so much for the tip on Rockfin, Roger Meadows. Sabby, I had a customer Saturday night who brought his daughter here for the Harry Styles concert. They were from Pennsylvania. I asked what he thought of Fetterman. He gave a typical answer that the average voter who is non-political gave, which was centered around feelings that politicians' ability to resonate with voters, but not policy. That is exactly how voters get fooled all the time. They're looking at their heart and get the feeling of whether they will do the right thing. A handshake and a look straight in the eye. He talked about his time as mayor. He said he was impressed with an interview with him talking about ending gentrification. I said, okay, how do you feel about his policies? He drew a blank and was struggling and went back to the gentrification interview. I said, but what specifically policy solution did he ever discuss you can point to? I gave him examples of policy prescriptions that Bernie gave as an example. The customer couldn't think of any policies he remembers Fetterman saying. The only policy he landed was on weed legalization. I told him the reason why I challenged you is because politicians make you focus off of policy and on personality traits. You gave me an emotional response as to how he made you feel minus policy prescriptions, but when I asked you about the policy, you drew a blank. I explained that policy is what will fundamentally change our lives for the better, not how the politician makes you feel. This is why I support ballot initiatives, because they are devoid of all of that fluff. Personality and how does he or she make you feel? Nonsense. Ballot initiatives deal with policy in its rawest form, forcing voters to deal and think about policy prescription. That's how politicians work over non-political voters, which most of us are all the time. Clyburn does fish fries, former Senator Levin does barbecues, and politicians show up at your son's graduation. They are in the community all the time. Not saying that it's bad, but they often will use that as a cover to push some egregious policies in DC, your state capital, city hall, council seat, etc., and voters will eventually see the effects but never make the connection. I emailed you a video backing up what you said last week about Fetterman and what I just said. Check the inbox when you can, and more Adolph and less Azos inspired by the other Adolph. Thank you so much for that, Roger. And thanks for the tip, old geologists. We mustn't let the bastards wear us down. Thanks so much. And I do see Professor Reed is here. So Eric, can we go ahead and bring him on?
Hi, how are you?
Reed. Nice to meet you.
I mean, likewise. Thanks for having me on.
All right, everyone. My special guest tonight is Professor Adolph Reed Jr. He's an American professor emeritus of political science at the University of Pennsylvania, specializing in studies of issues of racism and U.S. politics. Welcome, welcome. I have so many questions to ask you.
Okay, well, let's get on.
So one of the things that I focus on a lot on this show is the class issue. Mm-hmm. I have explained to my audience multiple times that if you're poor, I feel it doesn't really matter if you're on the left or the right, because at the end of the day, you're still poor. Right. So I'm trying to encourage people to focus more so on the billionaires and the top 1% and not so much on left versus right. And I want to get your opinion about that. Like, how do you think we can successfully, I guess, change people's focus in a way?
Right. Well, I tell you, I mean, one thing is that the left-right dichotomy has been stripped of meaning over the last 40 years anyway, right? If a long time ago, Christopher Hitchens, when he and I were friendly, told me that he had auditioned for the left chair on Crossfire, and this was during the Clinton administration. But they told him that as a leftist, the boundary of the left was that he couldn't criticize Clinton, right? And so at this point, like, I mean, you think about what the left is supposed to be in the Democratic Party, and we know what the right is. But yeah, I mean, your first point is the key point, right? That the categories don't have any meaning. They certainly don't have any meaning that directly addresses people's lives. So as a rule, when I'm talking to working people, I don't talk about the left or the right anyway. I mean, and that's what we do. If you don't mind the shameless plug for our podcast, classmatterspodcast.org. But when we talk to working people, we don't talk about left and right. We talk about concrete material issues. And I caught a bit of your observations about preferring ballot initiatives, and I think that's a better way for us to try to approach the electoral stuff. Because one of the things that we've noticed, at least in the last since I was going to say at least in the last 3 or 4 months, but really throughout COVID, is that working people have by and large lost faith, seem to have lost trust in government.
Yep.
And that makes sense because everybody's lying to them all the time, right? Like, from like on the liberal left side of things, right? Those increasingly hysterical emails that we all got during the Senate race last time around that tried to convince us that Jamie Harrison actually had a snowball's chance in hell of beating, almost call him Strom Thurmond, but I mean Lindsey Graham, right, the trans Thurmond. But anyway, but for all that kind of stuff, right, lying and not following through. So where we can have some impact, or have to hope to have some impact, is on talking to people about the concrete issues that they're concerned about, right? And yeah, I mean, so I completely agree that the debate between left and right is totally beside the point, and especially now that we're one morning sleeping through the alarm clock away from a fascist coup in this country, basically. So.
Agreed. I know one of the criticisms that we've received over at RBN is people say when we make that argument, like we did the marches for Medicare for All last year.
Oh yeah.
That happened over like 50 cities in the country. So
right.
when we did that, like people were mad at us because they said, how dare you march with conservatives? And I said, well, conservatives need healthcare too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if you want to see that I've been saying for decades now that we have to stop treating the movement, which doesn't exist in the first place, but we have to stop treating it like it's a threat, right? Like you don't have to show that you have all the secret words and use all the right language and adopt a secret handshake or whatever, but to be part of a movement for making this country better for people. And in fact, that's the best shot that we have to try to take away the scapegoating that the right wing actually lives on. And it's getting like more and more obvious and blatant. It seems like almost daily, right? I mean, but there's a new scapegoat every day, right? Grooming kids now, right? It is like a charge that they toss around. They don't even need to propose anything that even pretends to be evidence. They just have to say the word and it sticks. And like we've got to, and I mean, the Democrats aren't any better, right? I mean, obviously, right? It's clear now that Biden, and I've had to catch myself increasingly over the last 2 or 3 weeks from calling him Bush, but that Biden has decided that he's going to run against Trump, Putin, and Alito, and maybe China now too, right? And I've been saying to friends, it's just really telling the extent to which the Democrats will go. Like this is risking blowing up the world, but the extent to which they'll go to keep from doing anything to make working people's lives better. And it also answers the question, which again I've been saying since 2016, that wing of the Democratic Party is more frightened of a working class politics than it is of fascism. And they've made that clear too.
Agreed. I want to show you a study that came out of Princeton. I've shown this before on the show, but I try to show it multiple times when new people come in.
Yeah.
But this was a study that was done that came from Princeton. Now, this is from Professor Martin Gillens. I'm going to connect to
Martin Gillens, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you're probably familiar with this. But he did this study, and what he found was that when it came to actual policy change, so he had 2 graphs here, one for people who are low income and one for people who are middle income. And what he shows you is that when it comes to actual policy change, Nothing really happens for people who are low income and people who are middle income. It's a straight line. Actually,
Right.
someone pointed out the middle income one time. They said it actually looks like it dips a little bit. But for people who are high income, they actually have a greater percentage of policy change.
Right. Well, that makes sense. I mean, look, it's consistent with the finding that wealth and income have become increasingly polarized in this country over the last 50 years plus. I mean, and that's another reason that people don't have any faith in government, and don't get anything out of it. But on the other hand, people who are well off and have money do get stuff out of government, so they like it. It's kind of straightforward.
Agreed. And that leads me to the Democratic Party and their connection to Wall Street, because we've been doing this strategy for the past couple of years of putting like progressives through the Democratic Party. And look, I donated to Bernie Sanders and the squad, all of them. And I haven't seen them do anything, like really fight for the people.
Right.
And so I did some digging on my own on Open Secrets and other sites to see who is donating money to this party. And what I found is that even though some of the politicians may have run on grassroots campaigns, it still kind of doesn't matter, because they're going into a party where the leaders of that party take corporate money. So like Nancy Pelosi still takes corporate money, and she's the Speaker of the House.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, part of the problem is, and I don't lay any of this at Bernie Sanders' feet, right? Like he did the thing that he set out to do, and he was more successful in 2020, in my view, than he was in 2016, insofar as an objective was to create space for people who were inclined to organize around a working class politics at the grassroots level, could get some attention and could do it, right? And that was the big victory, I think, in 2020. We came out of the 2020 primaries stronger than we had been, like, in a long time, like at that level. We worked in South Carolina, and we did a public education campaign around the healthcare crisis, coincident with the South Carolina primary. And like we wound up, getting or having more than 18,000 people, mainly Black, mainly working class, signing pledge cards saying that they would prefer only to vote for candidates who supported Medicare for all. Beyond that, when they started talking about the possibility of having healthcare as a right, they started talking about having other stuff as a right, like post-secondary public education, right, or right to housing, right, or $20 an hour, living wage or whatever. The pandemic undercut a lot of that initiative that people had going. But so that's Bernie, right? The squad and the rest of that stuff, and like DSA also. The kind of naive sensibility is that you can elect your way out of class struggle, basically, right? Or for the DSA types, that you can elect your way to socialism, right? And I mean, one of my frustrations for a long time has been this kind of short-term, quick fix ad agency sort of consciousness, right? Even among people who consider themselves to be progressive. So you may recall 6 or 7 years before AOC that there was Kesheev Sawant, who got elected to the Seattle City Council. And then everybody all over the country was talking about how we can model what Kesheev Sawant did. And it doesn't work that way. But even with like the Justice Democrats and the Progressive Democrats strategy, so take the districts from which people like AOC get elected, right? They're safe Democratic districts, so that means you're not picking up any new seats, really. There's a more or less progressive or energetic or challenger who who's able to beat a long-term incumbent who has seen the demographic composition of the district change, right, underneath him or her. And how many seats are there like that in the House of Representatives? Like 20, right? So like this isn't a strategy that's going to turn the tables for us. But most of all, I just said this at the Buffalo DSA convention Sunday, that I lost my point. It's going to come back to me in a second. Don't worry about it. But that, oh yeah. So you win in a seat like that, right? There are, I mean, like I said, there may be 20 of them, right? Oh yeah, here's my point. That I was really impressed by and sort of proud of the Progressive Caucus in the House, during the fight around Build Back Better, right? Because among other things, they succeeded, I think, in shifting the corporate news infotainment industry's principal narrative. Right, their reflex was, well, the progressives just need to shut up and stop demanding stuff and act like adults and get behind Biden. They did a very good and forceful job, as you recall, of showing that they were both carrying the administration's water for it, right? So like they weren't fighting against the administration, but also making the point very, very clearly that the nature of the political challenges that face us now, the threats, are such that if the Democrats want to have any chance of doing anything, they've got to deliver real, palpable, concrete stuff to the great masses of working people. So they took control of the narrative, and they played the inside game very, very well, right? About as well as it can be played. They were very clever. Khanna and Jayapal and the others, Cori Bush. But what happened was when Manchin and Sinema, decided to go outside, right, the Beltway, and to act, not within the rules of the game, but forcefully to advance, the interests of their constituency back home, that is the corporate constituency. The Democratic Caucus or the Progressive Dems didn't have a response, right? So my perspective, right, at that moment, they should have been able to go outside the Beltway and mobilize their own constituents back home to do something like have 500,000 people sit down on the 14th Street Bridge and block access to DC, right? But they don't have that kind of constituency because they've been building a movement electorally, right? Like they don't, right? It's not rooted, right, institutionally, like in unions or in community groups or like any, other bodies that can actually mobilize a mass constituent base. So on the one hand, you get this, I'm giving $5 to a Democrat is like feeding a stray cat, right? So I get 40 emails a day, right, from this one in Colorado and that one in Texas and everywhere else, asking for money. But it's always the same thing. Like if we can just elect more Democrats, then we'll turn the tide. But that's simply just not the way the politics works.
Yes. And I feel like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are like rotating villains just because if it's not them, then it's the Senate parliamentarian that I had never heard of until last year. When Kamala Harris is the clear tiebreaker, she defers to the Senate parliamentarian. And when Obama was in office, I felt like it was Lieberman. Right. It's always someone.
Oh, yeah. No. I mean, that's a very important point, too. Right. That's a very important point because it always is. Right. It's always the devil made me do it. And it's been like that since Bill Clinton. Every Democratic president since Jimmy Carter has been elected on a promise to push labor law reform to tilt the playing field somewhat back in the direction of working people. And every one of them has sold it out, and they've all sold it out the same way, right? The pitiful, sorry, I almost said a bad word. But they mess around for 2 years and then lose control of Congress and then say, oh, well, the Republicans wouldn't let me do it, right? And this was Clinton, or Carter, Clinton, Obama, Biden, right? It's all the same thing. And you think the game would get kind of old, right? The people, granted, Charlie Brown never stopped trying to kick the football, but it's not that they are stupider than we are, right? And it's not that they don't want to win. So there's something else going on with the Democrats that progressives need to take, leftists, right? There's no left in this country, but there are leftists that leftists need to start taking into account and to make sense of, right, as to why they keep doing the same thing over and over again, right?
I'm sure you heard about what happened with Nina Turner's run this time around. This was her second time running.
Right.
The squad kind of like abandoned her, basically.
Right. Well, look, I mean, here's the problem too. We tend, like, the flip side of the coin of exaggerating the potential for victories or the significance of victories is a tendency to underestimate the opposition. Like, my classic illustration of this was the Seattle WTO, right, demos in 1999. Right, they caught the WTO completely, the World Trade Organization, completely by surprise, shut down the city, couldn't get any work done, and then all of our forces are thinking, okay, well, this is the new movement. No, like, this had to make an adjustment, right? They go meet on an island, like 50 miles off the coastline of somewhere, right? That you can only access by helicopter. I mean, the squad had something of an element of surprise about them. But the other side knows about this strategy now, and they mobilized against it. And I mean, Nina had other stuff, going against her too. Like, Martha Fudge hated her. They've had enmity going back a long time. And you knew once Fudge gets into the Biden administration, and Clyburn, right? Nina came up against Clyburn twice in South Carolina. And we all know what he is, right? And so we should know that, like, that they're going to bring out the big guns, right? So we shouldn't underestimate what we're up against either.
Well, now there's this new litmus test where it seems like if you criticize or critique Israel in any way, shape, or form, then you're smeared as an anti-Semite. And
that's new?
Oh, it's not new. I'm just now hearing about it more. But AIPAC pours out all this dark money to stop.
That's been going on for a long time too. I'm trying to think of this guy's name, Arthur, like it's Arthur with no H in it, who was elected in Alabama. This must have been 90s, I think, in a black district in Birmingham against. Kind of borderline, like, progressive black candidate, but the Israel lobby put a bunch of money right into his race to beat him, just like they put a bunch of money into Cynthia McKinney's race in Georgia to beat her. This has been going on for a good while, but totally, that's part of the game too.
I want to show you something that Nina Turner said about the Congressional Black Caucus that I thought was really interesting about the type of person that they're looking for, per se. Okay. So this was on The Hills Rising, and Ryan Grimm asked her about this question.
Okay.
Oh, Eric, can you play it for me? I lost.
I've heard that the Congressional Black Caucus in particular was animated about this race. And so I kind of want to ask, is that what you had heard? And also why? I'm not breaking any news to say that both you and Chantel Brown are both black. So why would the Congressional Black Caucus be so invested in one candidate over the other here, if that's what you had heard?
Yeah, I heard something very similar, Ryan, no doubt about it. I mean, they need to answer that question. I think that, even from the last race last year, I was told by a supporter that navigates those spaces, and this is very germane to this race too, but I was told by a supporter who actually navigates the corporate Democrat spaces, and they asked these people, why do you guys come at Nina Turner so hard? She's a Democrat too. And he was told, I'm not the right kind of Democrat. So I think that answers the question, even in this race as well, because I'm not the right kind, and being the right kind means that I speak up and I speak out. I center the people that I'm running to serve, not corporate interests, not owner donors. And so that is a problem for certain Democrats. And we know that the corporatist powers, whether they're rocking for Republicans or rocking for Democrats, they're rocking. And we know that they control, unfortunately, they control the levers of power in this country, and something must be done about it. And I rail against that all the time. So that doesn't make me particularly the flavor.
Yeah. Okay, right. So
yeah.
I want to get your opinion about that, the right kind of Democrat.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, look, it's a corporate Democratic Party, right? I mean, yeah, and that's what it is. And I mean, I don't see... I counted it up. Like I count it up every couple of years, and I think it's still the case that most of the votes that I've cast in my life, I've cast for Democrats. There are a number of races where I haven't voted for anybody, right? And only one time that I voted for a Republican, when Joe Lieberman ran for the Senate in Connecticut, and Lowell Weicker was the incumbent. And he was a Republican, and he was to the left of Lieberman, right? But having said that, and I'm registered as a Democrat because insofar as we have votes to cast that can mean anything for how people live, most of the time we're going to cast those votes for a Democrat because that's just the way things are. And I say that as somebody who spent, more than 15 years of my life as part of an effort to build an independent Labor Party anchored in the trade union movement, right? But most of the voting that you do in real time, but until you're able to build something else that's competitive, that's truly competitive, are going to be cast for Democrats, at least the way the system is now. But see, that's the other thing about it, right? You can understand that voting is a domain where most of the time you're going to have to vote for whatever the sorry Democrat is, right? I mean, some of your listeners may know in 2016, I wrote a column when people were talking about, never Hillary, called Vote for the Lying Neoliberal Warmonger, It's Important, right? Precisely because of that one, or the danger of Trump getting into the White House. But the movement that we need, first of all, doesn't exist, right? Way too many people imagine that all you have to do is put out a call for it, right? And people will show up. Like I was on a 10th anniversary of Katrina panel with Jill Stein, among other people. And, she was doing the Green Party thing or the Jill Stein thing. And I said at one point, well, but it takes more than, just having a good sound program, right? To mobilize voters to win an election. And she said, why does it? No, it doesn't, right? That's all you need. And I think, okay, well, that's a liberal way of thinking about politics, right? But I have often said and written that I look at the electoral domain as the place, or as a place for consolidating, institutionally consolidating victories that have been won on the plane of social movement organizing, right? So you build the constituency first, and then you start running candidates, right? You don't do it the other way around. But, for a lot of reasons, we could spend the rest of the night talking about one of the things that's happened among progressives in the U.S. over the last 40 years or so is that understanding has been flipped, and look, like the same thing happens every 4 years. The same thing happens. Like you look up about a year and a half out from voting and see that none of the candidates really looks attractive. And then you say, well, somebody better ought to run. And I want to say, shit, it's too late now. Like it's way too late, right? To talk about that now, right? Because because basis, it takes money and organization to be seriously competitive, like electorally, and people, you want to pretend that that's not the case, but it is, right? And I mean, that's all that domain is about. And I'll say this too, and this draws on our experience working in South Carolina, or my experience working in South Carolina in 2016 with the Sanders campaign, and for part of the time in 2020 with the Sanders campaign. I stopped working for the campaign and went to work in I'm a Medicare voter South Carolina campaign. But people, and Cedric Johnson's work has been really smart on this. Like, it's been so long since most people have seen the electoral arena as the domain that they involve themselves in, to realize the hopes that they have in their lives, right? The things that they think of, would make their lives better. Like, it's not even, and I think he was talking about this a little bit, like when I was in the room, right? Or when I was in the waiting room, that people don't look to elections as the places, as referenda on questions like healthcare reform,
Right.
Or public education, or privatization, or rent intensifying, redevelopment politics, or war for that matter, right? They don't, right? And it's not because they're stupid. It's because no one has treated. It's like both the major parties have contrived to squeeze the substantive content out of the electoral realm for longer than you've been alive, from the looks of things.
Yeah, it's one of the things I noticed. So going back to Bernie Sanders, like 2016, I said, okay, Bernie's not beating Hillary.
Right.
I felt like for those of us like on the left, I feel like we didn't have a plan B, like a backup plan. So I was talking to Cynthia McKinney about this as well. I felt like after Bernie lost, we should be like, okay, guys, we're all going to go for Bernie. But if Bernie Sanders doesn't win against Hillary Clinton, then we're all going to shift and we're going to vote for Jill Stein. She was in the ballot 44, 45 states.
Yeah.
And I feel like we didn't have a plan B. So then when the media tells you, well, you better vote for Hillary or you're going to get Trump, I feel like the reason why like third parties are not viable per se is because we're not used to voting for them in masses because we've been so conditioned to vote for the two-party system.
Well, yeah, that's certainly true, right? I mean, it's certainly true. But what that means, though, is it is that in the context of a given election, see, like I'll say this first. In 2016, I kind of hoped, after November, that Bernie would just go back to the Senate and do his work there. Because I thought naively, I was wrong, that especially because of the 7 national unions that had come together around Sanders' campaign, that we might have had a basis for doing the kind of grassroots work to try to build the coalition that we need to build, to broaden the base, to include some percentage of those 6 to 9 million people who voted for Trump, who had also voted for Sanders and for Obama at least once, right? A lot of those people who voted for Trump, no matter what else they think, were voting for him out of mistaken identity. And like those are people who should be our voters and not the right wing's voters, right? Mm-hmm. The problem, but I was wrong, because our side is so conditioned not to think beyond the electoral arena, right? That nothing happened. And it kind of makes sense, because as soon as November happens, then there's off-year races that you need to prepare for. Then there's like state and local races, like in the odd years, right, that you need to prepare for. So there's always an election, which means that the people who I'd hoped would have been in the position to drop anchor, to do a different kind of organizing, just went with the reflex of digging down and doubling and tripling down on the same old coalition. So that's why it was good that Bernie ran again in 2020. But like I said before, I mean, we came out of 2020 better than we did in 2016 because there were pockets of activity that had kind of taken hold of the grassroots in different states, largely around Medicare for all, right? But that's also right and stuff you can build on. But as to the Jill Stein things, see, I mean, here's the thing, like, people aren't gonna vote for a brand X candidate. Right?
But why is that? Like, how do we change that?
Well, no. See, I'd rather look at it the other way around, right? Like what? And this goes back to your point about the ballot initiatives, right? See, I think that issue-based organizing is what we need to build a movement, right? I mean, there's, from one perspective, people who are concerned with like working people's interests actually got more from Richard Nixon than we got from any one of the 4 Democratic presidents who came after him. And it's not that Nixon liked us; he didn't like us worth of shit. Excuse me, but and I know that Carter, with his funny flavor of Jesus, right? I mean, agonized, right, about it, and Clinton with his a good friend of mine who's a political science professor who went to law school after he finished his PhD. He said to me, he said, what they do in those fancy law schools is teach you how to argue persuasively that what is clearly and manifestly X is somehow indeed not X. And that's what people like Clinton and Obama got out of Harvard Law School, basically. But Clinton, like I'm sure, had his existential angst, because everybody in my age cohort did. Right? You just have crisis of purpose, and what you see in the mirror at 3 o'clock in the morning is the person that you want to be and the person that you're not, or whatever. And I've been saying of late that people believe what they need to believe to do what they need to do, and that kind of nimble intellectual training helps you like my dad used to say that from one perspective, ideology is the mechanism that harmonizes the principles that you want to think you hold with what advances your material interest. So people like do that, right? But the point is, and like the liberal Democrats have been saying to us again for half a century, well, they can't do anything for us yet. Now they got to go take care of Wall Street, but once they take care of Wall Street, they'll come back for us, right? And I mean the thing, and I'll be honest, like a lot of my friends in the labor movement, I used to sit around and drink and sort of compare wounds and whatnot. And one thing we'd often do is or sometimes do, is think about the best metaphor to describe, the relationship between the Democrats and the labor movement. And we thought about stuff like abused child or battered spouse. And the one that we really finally seemed to catch was like a 2 a.m. booty call, right? Right, because they don't want to be seen with us in public. They don't want to do anything for us, right? And make pillow talk promises in the wee hours of the morning. And you're supposed to hang on that, right? But see, the problem is that you can't just announce there's some other candidate or there's some other party, right? The party's got to grow out of, or the initiative, right? Has to grow out of the organizing. And this takes us back again to your point about ballot initiatives. I think that's where progressives' electoral strategy ought to be, right? So that if AOC, right, can have the appeal of being a less airheaded version of a Rosario Dawson, right? But if she's just the face on a ballot initiative, so I don't know, to end privatization, then it doesn't matter so much what she does or what Nancy Pelosi tells her to do or what she comes and tells us that we need to do without acknowledging that it was Nancy Pelosi that told her. because she would never have been the real story anyway, right? The real story would have been the issue. And I think as we go forward in thinking about running campaigns, one of the things we need to do, or I think would be really helpful, would be to think or to craft campaigns that, even if they're candidate based, are the equivalent of ballot initiatives, right? So like you can run, I don't know, several candidacies in a state or in a county or around the same pertinent issues, right? So that the political initiative comes to be understood as being connected to the issue, right, not to the personality. And that's where I think our best bets for organizing are in the future.
Yeah, I think that I focused a lot on ballot initiatives because I'm in Massachusetts and we're a BI state. So we've accomplished a lot through ballot initiatives. So sometimes I feel a little guilty because some of the things that we're fighting for on the federal level, we already have in Massachusetts, like the $15 minimum wage. We've had that. Legalizing marijuana, we've had that. So I wonder, in reference to combining the two, organizing direct action / organizing and electoral politics, something that's kind of come up. So there's some people on the left that have kind of given up, and I don't want to say given up, but they don't want to do this anymore. I'll just be honest with you. They don't want to put progressives through the Democratic Party anymore. I'm at that door knocking myself. I and those of us at RBN have a different strategy idea. We think, instead of focusing our attention 80% on electoral politics and 20% on direct action mutual aid, we think we should flip it. And we think we should put 80% into direct action mutual aid and maybe 20% into electoral politics. And even for me, when I talk about electoral politics, I mean more so on the local level. Find out who your city councilor is. A lot of people don't even know. Most people I talk to, they don't know. Yeah, pay attention who's running for mayor, who's running for governor. I feel like electoral politics works better on the local level in terms of getting something changed or implemented. But when it comes to direct action and mutual aid, I look back at something like the civil rights movement, and that wasn't done through electoral politics.
Well, no, but on the other hand, though, and I mean, this is where I guess I'm more skeptical about the mutual aid stuff, right? And also about the direct action. I mean, direct action's fine, but I'm really pretty skeptical about mutual aid politics, to be honest, because I think it partly connects to something I was saying a little while ago about how the working people have lost faith in government, right? There are so I'm in New Orleans at the moment, right? And the levee system here is vital, right, to keeping this whole part of the country afloat, right? And especially since hurricane season starts in a week and a half or whatever. You can't mutual aid your way to a levee system. You can't mutual aid your way to FEMA, right? You can't mutual aid your way to climate control, right? Or I mean, to labor market planning, right? Which we have to have also. So I mean, there are things that have to happen, and it can happen only at the national level and at the big level. And look, I mean, I know the mutual aid stuff has gotten really attractive, especially with a lot of younger people, because it just feels like you're doing something. But I mean, not everything that one is doing is the thing that needs to be done, I think. And I'll say this too, right? There's nothing, in a way, or to some extent, mutual aid is like a new name over what people have always done already anyway, right? People in, neighborhoods had, burial societies or all kinds of stuff. But what's going to protect us, and especially protect us from what's coming down the road at us, is strengthening the national regulatory state, right? And fighting for federal policies that level the playing field between workers and employers, that 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 give everybody access to healthcare and to education as far as interest and ability will take them as a right. And we can't, from the perspective of those big needs, it just feels like the mutual aid stuff is like helping people make it through the night, right? And God knows, we all need something to help us make it through the night. So I'm not pissing on it, but it just, I'm very skeptical that it can be like a political strategy that can help move us closer to where we need to go.
Well, I'll give an example. So like Rome, Comrade Rome from RBN, he does Tour for the Poor. So he travels across the country and he gives clothes and food to homeless people. He came here and met me in Boston. We did the same thing. And so the homeless population has increased since the pandemic. So there's a mini Skid Row now in Boston.
Oh yeah.
So
I'm not surprised. There is in most places. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like when it comes to things like that, like food, clothes, hygiene products, like those kinds of things. And then also things that you can do for people in your community. Like some people here can't shovel snow. So helping other people do it.
Right.
The community aspect, I feel, I'm a millennial. So with my generation, I feel like we lost community. I feel like we don't have it. Like when I hear my parents talk about everybody, all of us knew each other. My parents are from Baltimore. So they're like, everybody knew each other. And you knew whose kids were who and whose parents were. And my generation, as I became an adult, like I didn't know who my neighbors were. There was like no sense of community. I think more so we're more focused on like social media, like that kind of thing. But I think in terms of like mutual aid, like thinking about what the Black Panthers did, I think they realized a long time ago that the government was not going to help their community. So they decided to help each other, and like the free breakfast program and building clinics. Like we can still do that.
Yeah. I tell you what, though, I mean, there's a lot of romanticism about that Panther story, right? I mean, OEO had already created a free breakfast program or a free lunch program, right? So, I mean, but still, I mean, what it translates into. So like the Panthers, I think the most you can say for the Panthers, with those initiatives was that they got something going that the public agencies were able to come in and do better, right? Because they had the resources, right? So that's not a bad thing, right? But again, see, I think that's a little closer to social work than it is to politics. And there can be like a little bit of overlap. Like in Philly, I used to work pretty closely with the Kensington Welfare Rights Union, right? And like they did a lot of that kind of work, right? With squatters and like getting bags of groceries for people and stuff. But I'll bet you've seen this to some extent, like in your own work. I mean, to this point, that people who need bags of groceries need bags of groceries, and they're really going to be happy to get the bags of groceries. Getting the bags of groceries doesn't translate into taking next political steps, right? I mean, necessarily, right? And it's good that people have the bags of groceries. Don't get me wrong, and it's a good thing to do. But but that's why I say that it feels to me more in the domain of social work than in politics, right? And I don't say that to disparage it. I'm just trying to get the categories straight, right? Because for me, the key thing is, and I know I'm kind of single-mindedly focused on this, but we have to build a mass movement, right? I mean, there's no way around it, right? And I think one of the problems with the Gen Xers, I guess, like those are the ones, the first of the generations after the boomers to have their own name. And by the way, they're really all marketing categories anyway, right? I mean, starting from mine, the boomers, all we ever were was a marketing category. But increasingly, as connection to a dynamic social movement or political movement has receded farther and farther into the past, people have less and less experience with it or familiarity with it, and just want to see things happen, right? Like, I mean, how many times have you heard people say, the danger is so great now that we don't have time for X, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is that one of the reasons that the dangers are so great now is that we haven't taken time for X, for the last 40 years, with X being trying to connect with people who don't already agree with us and making different kind of connections with our neighbors and coworkers and fellow union members or whatever, around political issues, and trying to form alliances around those issues. See, like the case with the reproductive rights now, I think, is an interesting one in this regard. One of the reasons I think that we're in the position that we're in now is that beginning in the 80s, late 80s and the 90s, bourgeois democratic Clintonite feminists disconnected the idea of women's interest in politics from a much broader political economic front that the left wing of the feminist movement had engaged in, right? I mean, not just reproductive freedom and rights, but a universal publicly funded child and elder care, right? Real family leave. I mean, I was stunned during the Clinton administration when everybody was jumping up and down about passage of the Family Medical Leave Act, when I learned that it's unpaid. Right? I mean, unpaid leave for working people is no damn leave, right? And maybe your boss at the poultry plant will hold your job for you on the assembly line, or I guess the disassembly line. But anyway, and if we had been able all along, and by the way, it's not just women, like blacks and Hispanics and stuff, got the same treatment. So like all of our interest in politics got reduced to a kind of half-assed defensive affirmative action, which is like the equivalent of choice, but I hope no woman ever has to have an abortion, and appointments, right? So somehow blacks and Hispanics are no longer part of the working class, right? Like we aren't concerned about housing shortage or anything like that. But what happened with respect to the abortion issue in particular was because it was disconnected from a broad array of working class concerns or concerns that working people have, it was left there for the right to pick up on and to fashion it as a religious and a moral issue. Like often when I'm talking to people who are opposed to abortion or opposed to same-sex marriage, I'll ask them something like, well, what's more important to you? Is it more important to you that no woman can ever have an abortion, or that you can have a right to a decent job and a decent wage and send your kids to college and have health care? And if we can have that conversation with people, then that might have helped us over the last 40 years put together an alliance of some people who, don't want to have or think abortion is a sin or whatever, but are willing to keep that view to themselves because they also want, I don't know, to fight for the 4-day week, right?
Right.
And they'll fight with other people who want to win the 4-day week. And they put the abortion issue right on the side, or keep it as a personal matter. And by the way, that's what the right has done, right? The right, since Reagan, has forged this alliance of people like going back to Reagan, right? Silicon Valley libertarians who didn't have any morals whatsoever and would snort all the cocaine in the world of and have sex with animals or whatever, but they figured out from in the process of reproducing this alliance, right, with the Christian right, that even though if I, as say Elon Musk, right, couldn't give less of a shit about abortion just so long as I can get one for my daughter and my mistress, right? I would vote abortion and fund candidates who run on the abortion issue, because I understand that the nature of the alliance is or such that an essential condition for my getting what I want, which is, say, no taxes for rich people ever, is to support candidates who will run on that agenda as well as principally the abortion rights agenda. And see, this is something, and it's partly the difference here is that the right has had some place they've been trying to go for the last 40 years. And that place, I mean, after the Republicans took over Congress in 1994, I watched a press conference on C-SPAN. It was like Newt Gingrich, Dick Armey, Tom DeLay, a bunch of names that probably none of your viewers know, Livingston, and they were sneering, right? And each one of them was saying that they wanted to take the country back to the 1920s. And they were serious. And we see it now, they're serious, right? They want to get rid of every bit of social regulation that's been adopted in the last 100 years in this country to facilitate upward transfer, right? And I mean, meatpacking, but the Clinton administration imposed the deepest cuts on federal meat inspection, by the way. But it's all been getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. I mean, FEMA, right? I mean, with the bankruptcy of the federal on the regulatory apparatus, but also state level public health agencies around the country, right? They've all been cut and bled, and I mean, whether Republicans say, well, we're cutting the spending or this social spending because we're cutting it, to hell with you, we don't care. What the Democrats have been saying to us since Bill Clinton is, well, we're going to cut it too, but we'll still deliver the service, and it will be just as good because we're smarter, right? And we know how to do more with less. Well, there's no such thing as doing more with less, right? You do more with more, you do less with less, right? That's why more is called more and less is called less, basically, right? And again, Katrina, and granted, like, it's kind of a pet peeve of mine, but was the shining illustration of the extent to which that line is bullshit. But this is coming from so many different fronts and so many different, directions now. For the love of God, excuse me. That we've got to face up to the fact that there's no quick and easy way out of this. The only way we're going to get out of it is to dig in and start trying to build a deeply and broadly based movement across the society. And this kind of brings me back to why it's helpful to vote for Democrats. It's kind of like a holding action, right? No, like we aren't getting much out of the Democrats in Congress, right? But what we can get, if they hold onto it, is holding back the tide of what I really do think, there's no hyperbole here, is going to be like an authoritarian takeover of the country if the Republicans get control of all three branches of government. They smell the blood in the water. I did an article last summer called "The Whole World is the Reichstag." You can find it on nonsite.org. It makes this argument, right? So this is what's coming. And I think, as I've also been saying, that just looking around the globe, right, it looks a lot like we may have gotten to a point at which neoliberalism, left neoliberalism of the Democrats or right neoliberalism of the Republicans, is no longer capable of delivering enough stuff to enough of the population to maintain its legitimacy as a nominally democratic social order. And if that's the case, there are only two directions we can go in. One is authoritarian, and I don't care if you want to call it fascist or not. And the other is kind of in the direction of social democratic policies like the Sanders campaign was pushing, and like the Clinton, Biden, Pelosi, Schumer wing of the Democratic Party has now made very clear that they're more frightened of than they are a fascist coup. And what we need more than anything else in these unattractive options is just to have some breathing space, right, to try to organize. But of course, that won't mean anything unless the organizing happens. So.
But I think like maybe, considering everything that's happened like the past 2 years, especially like after the pandemic, people not wanting to force a vote on Medicare for all during a pandemic, to me, it was a big wake up call that like our government doesn't really care about the people. They care about corporations and their donors.
Sure.
Maybe Democrats have to lose, Professor Reed. Like maybe that's the only way they're going to really wake up.
But see, this could be the final loss, right? Right, because I don't see it. See, I think this is really the case that people don't really take in. Like we've had it kind of, well, I wouldn't say good in the U.S., right? But even people who understand themselves to be radicals or leftists have tend to take for granted, right? Even like the limited forms of free speech and public assembly and freedom of movement and some expectation like of due process that we've had in this country. And I'm telling you, like the point I'm trying to make, and maybe it's better to talk about it concretely than to use more abstract terms like authoritarianism. All that stuff is going to go if and when the Republicans come back in power, right? It's not just reproductive freedom. It's going to be everything, right? But with the taking stuff, right? I mean, this other ruling that calls into question the federal government or Congress's ability to delegate regulatory power to the executive branch. That's the end of meat inspection. That's the end of the National Transportation Safety Board. That's the beginning of the real way that the idiocracy thing is going to happen. It's not going to happen just because people are getting stupider and stupider, but it's going to happen because the regulatory capacities of the federal government and of state governments are undone, right? That all this industry that's grown up over the last 15, 20 years, selling doubt, basically, right? And sowing doubt about everything. And that's come to the fore first around the gun stuff, and then around the pandemic, right? The vaccine and masking. It's the apparatus or the rhetorical apparatus and the program is already there, right? Like we know what they want to do, and if they come to power, none of us. Well, a lot of us are going to wind up being killed or sent to concentration camps. That's point number one. But if they come to power, there's not going to be any hope of getting them out of power for a generation at least. And all the damage that they can do to everybody in this country will be very, very difficult to undo. And I think that's a message that people need to start hearing and taking to heart. And as my grandmother used to say, well, when your hand's in a lion's mouth, you act accordingly. And our hands are in a lion's mouth now.
But I'm thinking back to what Malcolm X taught us and what MLK taught us. And they warned us about the moderate. They warned us about the liberal. And I'm seeing a lot of these things like come to life that they've been talking about. And what I'm trying to figure out is when I look at like the Black community, how did we go from the fight and the energy that MLK and Malcolm X had? How did we go from that to embracing neoliberalism and thinking that we can vote our way through change? Something happened there. And I feel like that kind of fight and energy is just gone. And to be real, they had thousands of people at the March on Washington. There was no internet. There was no social media.
Right.
Like what happened? I feel like us going into the Democratic Party actually hurt the Black community, because the Democrats have tricked us and got us to believe that they're actually going to help us, but they don't do anything for Black communities. Look, Joe Biden's funding the police more. He's funding them more than Donald Trump was. And so they have kind of sold out our communities to the police state. And so I just see the Democratic Party as they're the more effective evil. They're still trying to hurt the Black community, but they smile and give you candy and they stab you in the back. So I think that's my,
yeah. Well, yeah. I hear you. I mean, I think a couple things. I mean, one is, so the story about the relation between Black people and the Democrats sounds a little different depending on the point where you drop the needle on the record, right? So because the emergence of the Black vote as a product of the Great Migration out of the South around the First World War changed the Democratic Party, right? And pushed the Democratic Party, or was part of a complex of forces that pushed the Democratic Party to the left. And it got the New Deal. And Black people got a lot out of the New Deal, right? And that's one of the reasons that Black people became committed to the Democrats. And then after the late 1950s, the Republicans, certainly by Goldwater, like the Republicans made it very clear that they were going to run against Black people because the Democrats had, had the Black vote. Also, the significance of the '64 Civil Rights Act, and especially the Voting Rights Act, was really crucial, right? So Black people started holding office like they'd never held office before, especially not since the Reconstruction. And these people, Clyburn and all the mayors and stuff, are integrated like into the Democratic apparatus. So they're Democrats, they're power brokers within the Democratic Party, and they share. And we've seen how they have evolved, or how the Black political class that came out of the Voting Rights Act and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act evolved, right? Into this systemic force. But at the same time, right? All these black mayors and stuff, and Black council members and stuff, actually did things or created constituencies for themselves among Black people by being able to do stuff that Black people couldn't expect to get from local governments before, and state governments too. So, but it's also a double-edged sword, because you're right? I mean, those elected officials are committed to downtown development interests, just like the white ones are, right? But so, I mean, the relationship of Black Americans and the Democratic Party is a complicated one. And certainly Black Democrats, like in the Congressional Black Caucus and all these mayors and stuff, are as sorry as anybody would ever say they are. But again, like, the only way to overcome that is by organizing the popular movement, and it can't just be a Black movement either, right? So that's the other thing, right? The only hope that we have, right, is to start trying to craft ways of thinking and talking about politics and concrete agendas that appeal widely to working people, right? And I mean, so like, I'll just take I'll just gratuitously drop a hand grenade in my lap, but defund the police, right? You couldn't imagine a worse issue, right? And it's done the most work for the right wing. No, vast majority of Black and brown people don't want to defund the police. They want better policing, right? Like I was in a conversation in Mount Holyoke a month ago, and a student in the audience asked why I thought it was that polls show that most Black and brown people don't support defunding the police is a demand. And I said, well, it's because those are people who are likely to live in neighborhoods where they want to know that after somebody breaks in their house and takes their TV set, if they pick up 911 or they pick up the phone and dial 911, there'll be somebody who picks up on the other end, right? So people want crime addressed, certainly, right? They want to feel protected. And God knows there's a lot that's wrong with policing, but the main problems have to do with neoliberal approaches to policing, which are about suppressing populations that are considered to be potential threats to people who have property, right?
But when I think about defunding the police, like it's interesting who they poll, right? So they typically don't poll like people in my generation. We're usually not polled at all. But if you talk to a lot of people who are Black millennials and Gen Z, we actually have no problem with defunding the police. And that's the thing. A lot of times our voices aren't heard.
Well, it's also partly because they don't have any property and they don't vote either, right? So, I mean, that's another part,
yeah,
right?
that's another part of it too. But
Yeah.
I do just want to say, like, when it comes to policing per se, I think it's important for us to remember where policing comes from. The history of policing comes from slave patrols.
You know what? I'm sorry. It doesn't.
No,
it doesn't. Right. Yeah, I'm sorry to be so blunt about it, but actually, no, the first municipal police forces were in places like Boston and Philadelphia and New York City, right? And Cincinnati, right? I mean, the whole slave patrol thing is a mythology on the same order as the claim that the 13th Amendment didn't abolish slavery, which is one that I heard, by the way, first from a guy in the militia movement in Northwest Arkansas.
I'm gonna look that up, Professor Reed.
Go right ahead.
I'm gonna look that up. But in reference to like the policing issue, I think that from what I've seen, I've lived in, all Black community in Baltimore. I've lived in white communities. I've lived in diverse communities.
Where in Baltimore did you live?
Baltimore City. My grandparents and my parents grew up there. So I lived there for a short time. And police behave differently when they come into a Black neighborhood and when they go into or a wealthy neighborhood as well. They behave differently.
Well,
and I've seen them harass.
Black and wealthy, right, is like a category problem, right? Because there are white areas where police act just like they do in Black areas. That's true. Right, because the point is, and I mean, when you go out to those big empty, geometrically shaped states out in the West, where there are no Black people, white people play the role that Black people play, right? Because, and I'm not trying to diminish racism as a component of it, but the key question or the key focal point of this kind of policing is, as I said, suppressing populations that people who have property consider to be potential threats to their property, right? And even if you think about it that way, that even helps to broaden the coalition to fight for police reform, right?
But we already have police reform.
Well, no, we need better and more fundamental police reform, right? I mean, I don't mean bullshit like body cams, right? Which are always a double-edged sword anyway. No. I mean fundamental reorganization of the policing function and how it's understood, right? And I know that's what some people want to mean when they say defund the police, but the problem is that the slogan itself doesn't have specific content. So what's happened is that the right wing takes it and makes it seem like lawlessness is what the demand is, and we didn't have to give them that, right? You follow me?
Well, there was actually an initiative called 10 Demands, and Nick from RBN is one of the co-founders of that, and it lists all the demands with defunding the police. And I'll show it. I'll go ahead and share it with you really quick and show you. Because I think I want more people to know about this, 10 demands, and they listed all 10 of them here. that they had for defunding the police. Number one, I'll just read them off. Defund the police and reallocate resources to impacted communities. Number two, demilitarize the police. Number three, eliminate discriminatory policing, prosecution, and sentencing. 4, institute complete law enforcement transparency and accountability. 5, independently investigate all police crimes and abuses of power. 6, install community representation, oversight, and safety measures. 7, end strategic counter-protest violence. 8, apologize and provide reparations. 9, end the war on drugs. And 10, end carceral punishment. And in reference to crime, I think if you want to fix crime, we need to fix the poverty issue.
Well, yeah, but see, I mean, here's the problem, Sabrina. That's certainly true, right? But in the meantime, what happens to people who feel like they're prey in these impacted poor communities? And well, I think the problem with the demands is like most of 2 through 9, almost all of 2 through 9 seem perfectly reasonable to me. But the problem is that one, I mean, the number one demand negates almost all of the rest of them, right? Like if you defund the police, well, if you defund the police and reallocate the money, well, then you've gotten rid of then you've demilitarized the police because there's no police, right? But all the rest of the stuff presumes that there will be police, right? Right, all the training stuff, which I wholeheartedly support, and I mean the civilian input and stuff. But the first demand doesn't really do anything except give the right wing a flag. Right, I've had a red flag to swing, and they've been swinging it. Right.
But police, and this is why I tell people though, but police don't really prevent crime though. Because do the police prevent the school shooting that just happened today?
No,
they don't. They don't prevent, and they only solve 0.02% of crimes. So if we were to legalize things like marijuana, like federally, if we legalize marijuana, or let's go really far out there like Portugal did, and they decriminalized all drugs.
Yeah, which I think ought to happen too. Right.
All right, we're on board with that one. So if we do that, do we still need to give more funding to the police?
Well, see, but here's the thing. So, like, I mean, back when we were trying to get the Labor Party off the ground, right? I mean, there were a lot of really earnest progressives out there who wanted to get rid of a military spending and to get rid of the defense budget, right? And in fact, I'd worked in that movement for a while myself too. And at our convention, right, we had there's a guy, good guy, he wanted to introduce a resolution that would, well, I'll forget about that. I'll say this. One of the things that those people used to do, right, was they would focus on what they called conversion, right, and could show at a level of abstraction, right, that if you take all the military budget and convert it to peacetime uses, then all the jobs that would have been lost, right, because of getting rid of the military budget, would be replaced by jobs that were generated in the peacetime conversion industries, right? That sounded reasonable as hell at one level of abstraction. It was not in any way persuasive to people who held jobs working in the defense industry, because they knew that they were going to lose their jobs. And there's this thing the economists called transaction costs, right? That they were going to have to pay. It's the same thing with this proposal about ending poverty. And in the first place, no municipal police budget in this country it would be large enough to make a dent on poverty in the city that that the police operate in. But like, what happens in between? What happens to the reality that not everybody who's in prison is has been railroaded, and even some of the people who have been railroaded are dangerous criminals. Right? That's what happens with that, right? I mean, there's a level at which people live where all this stuff has to be worked out to make sense. And I mean, the more abstract the slogan, and this is what we were talking about when I first came on, right? The more abstract the slogan, the less good it can do for us, and the harder it is for us to organize around it. And the easier it is for the other side to organize around it, because all they're doing is scapegoating anyway. That's all they want, right? So I don't know. I mean,
but we shouldn't have to. I feel like we shouldn't have to change who we are or what we want to make that side feel comfortable. Like
well,
that's kind of.
Well, that put it a different way, right? Because I'm not saying make the right wing feel comfortable. What we need to do is to inoculate people who ought to be with us, to insulate them from the scapegoating. And that's just politics. That's all that is, right? I mean, that's the difference between politics and taking a moral stand. And I don't really care about taking moral stands. I think that's what happens after you're defeated, right? Or after you've won, right? But that's not the way to win. But again, like I'm not calling for taking a half step back on principle, right? But Mao Zedong said, and it's not often I quote him, but that the point of politics is to unite the many to defeat. And that's something else I think that we've lost in how progressives think about politics, right? Because what we need to do is to find those points of commonality that are shared most broadly within the society and organize on the basis of building solidarity around those commonalities, and then struggling on that base of solidarity to work out the points of difference, like the abortion issue, for instance, is one, right? Right. So, like, if we had if we had 15 million people aligned in a movement for national health care, and then somebody, Trump or somebody tried to toss the abortion issue into the ranks. And by the way, what they talk about Hispanic women or about Hispanics being opposed to abortion. Like, Hispanic women get abortions at the same rate as other women. Catholic women get abortions at the same rate as other women, right? And we ought to be able to take that issue off the political agenda. And the way that we can do it is by building an alliance around needs that people feel every day. And when some people's knees get kind of weak around a question like abortion or same-sex marriage, you can say to them, well, look, I'm not even trying to change the way that you feel about it, right? Because I'm not your priest, right? But what I'm asking you is, what's more important to you? That we win national health care, or that no woman can ever get an abortion, right? And yeah, I mean, some people would say, well, it's more important to me that no woman can ever get an abortion. I'd say, fine, well, see you later, right? But we've got to assume that between us, which would be in the case of this issue, the 80 to 90% of people in the country who do support access to abortion, and whatever percentage of those others we can get, we'll be able to win. But we can't get anything if we don't build that movement, right? And you started it out by pointing out that the Democrats basically don't ever offer us anything except bubblegum in hard times, and are always fresh out of bubblegum. So like, we need to build the alternative, right? But we have to build the alternative, right? It's not just a matter of saying, well, I believe this, therefore this is what we should do, right? The politics is around the movement building. And by the way, the civil rights movement and the CIO were the same thing, right? I mean, not everybody shared complete agendas, and there are a lot of assholes in that movement too.
I think I would like to see us build something like the March on Washington, with thousands and thousands of people, with a list of demands on. So you mentioned economic issues and social issues,
Right.
with a list of demands we're not going to vote for you if you don't
Right.
do this, 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 and this, like Medicare for all.
Right. But see, before the march comes the organizing around the issues, and it takes a lot of political education. Your podcast, our podcast, others, right? But most importantly, face-to-face engagement with people, right? But the movement. So again, right? I mean, the March on Washington didn't just happen, right? Like
Right.
You know, A. Philip Randolph and Rustin and the Negro American Labor Council, like, were organizing in cities around the country for months, and there was already a thick web of activists and local movements, right, that existed. We don't have any of that now. Like, we have the activists,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, I mean, Langston Hughes was rumored to have said, I don't know if it's true, once that every black person with a new suit and $5 in his pocket is a Negro leader. And we've got that kind of world now, right? Like, or as I sometimes put it, I mean, any fool with a computer or a phone and access to the internet can be a Negro leader, right? I mean, and it's like that out there, right? And the blogosphere and Twitter are like full of people now, but there's a difference between people making calls for stuff to happen and real social forces that have institutional capacity, right? Capacity to do stuff like stop a redevelopment project, for instance, right? And we haven't had the capacity to do that for years. I mean, I've been involved in a number of those too. And what happens is, by the time that we find out, that our side finds out, it's already too late to stop it, right? So the best you can do is try to negotiate the best possible terms of surrender. And on that point, I mean, by the way, like, a really great book, I think actually the best thing that's ever been done on the carceral state apparatus, is by my colleague, Marie Gottschalk, and it's a book called Caught. And it's a very careful examination of how this thing took shape, and moreover, how it's having taken shape has created its own dynamics of interest. So it's not just a matter of rolling back to where we were. The private prison industry is itself a product of the growth of the carceral state. And once it comes into existence, it becomes another dynamic actor, right, in the process. But I would really recommend that to to all your viewers and the listeners, because if we do want to tackle this thing, we first of all have to have a much clearer sense of what it is and what it's about. And I'll say this: there's absolutely nothing that we can learn from slavery that will help us make sense of the circumstances that confront us right now.
I have one more question for you, Professor.
Oh, sure.
Reed.
Yeah.
How do you feel about a general strike?
You can't have a general strike unless you've got the organization, right? I mean, what a general strike would be like somebody. Well, in fact, I remember several years ago, like, a friend of mine was on a panel at the New School, and I was and I watched the link, and like, this was during Occupy, and a young guy from Occupy got up and made the announcement about the general strike that they had called, and he said, so now it's not going to be like your traditional general strike where you're not expected to go to work. So I thought, well, what the fuck is it then if it's not that, right? Like, a general right, a strike is when you don't go to work. So, but it was just something that felt good, right, to say and to think about and to wish for. And like, that's the kind of politics that's going to lead us into the concentration camps. Right.
What?
Yes, because it can't happen, right? Right, it can't happen. And if it could happen, making it happen would take all the steps I've been talking about the whole time that we've been talking, right? Because here's the most important point. The most important point is that as a left, we've got nothing. There's nothing, right? And it has to be generated. And wow, like if at some point, we had the political capacity to call a general strike, like in one city, even. I mean, that'd be great. But you got to roll back to what the requirements are for being able to do something like that, right? And the first thing you got to have is mass organization of workers. Well, we don't have that. So a general strike could be cool.
But what about the truckers? Look how the truckers like organized and shut things down.
Where in Canada, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Well, first place, I mean, they were heavily funded by right-wing interests, right? There were no left-wing interests that would fund the strike for us, right? Because strike means that people don't get paid, right? And they can't pay their bills, right? And they get evicted, and they can't get their medicine, right? I mean, and yeah, I mean, like I said, like the truckers were, yeah, I mean, they had a choke point, but there was a right-wing mobilization. That was also a lot of smoke and mirrors. So, but I'm telling you, like, there's just no shortcuts, right? There's no easy ways for us. Like, there's no way around it. Like, we got to do the organizing, and if we don't, we're dead. We might be dead anyway, but we're definitely dead if we don't do it.
I'm trying to get you away from the Democratic Party, Professor Reed.
Oh, I'm not in the Democratic Party.
Okay.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, I registered as a Democrat, and when I vote, most often I will vote for Democrats because that's what you do when you vote. But that's not where the movement's going to come from, right? No, I mean, like, yeah, no, yeah, it's not where the movement's going to come from. So we've got to try to build it. And that's got nothing at all to do with the Democrats, actually.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. Because I was thinking, like, I don't think we should do movement through electoral politics.
Oh, no. Yeah, no, you and I are on the same page about that completely.
Well, Professor Reed, thank you so much for coming on. It was a great discussion.
Yeah, I think so too. Thanks a lot for having me. And I hadn't seen your podcast before, but I'm really happy to know it now.
Thank you.
Yep. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
All righty, guys. I think I have some comments and some chats or super chats over here. I'm going to address those really quick. Thank you for the super chat, Paul Lewis. Thanks for a great interview. Adolph Reed is a fierce and brilliant intellectual warrior of conscience. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for the super chat, Delthea Simmons. It shouldn't matter who holds the seat. What matters is that whoever is elected, they must be more afraid of their constituents than they are beholding to their donors. Well said. Thank you for the super chat, KD Cumberbatch DDS. Love what you're doing. You are much needed and appreciated. Thank you so much. Thank you for this super chat, Danny. Does Dr. Reed think there would be more active political engagement if the draft were reinstated? Ooh, that's a good question, Danny. That's a good one. Sorry, I missed that one. Thank you for the super chat, Kami John. Police exist to enforce capitalism. They evict people from homes, destroy unhoused encampments. They fill prisons for cheap labor. Abolish that. What is that? Oh, that's a poop emoji. Abolish that shit, police. Thanks so much for that. And I think I have comments on Rockfin. Sorry, Eric, I missed this one. Alrighty. Thank you so much for the tips on Rockfin, Roger Meadows. I also had a brother I picked up from one of the Amazons in Staten Island, not the two that's been getting all the media attention. Believe me, they got a whole bunch of buildings over there, I think 6 or 8 of them. When I talked to them about what was going on, he told me he drove for Amazon and said he was on the fence because he had a bad experience with the previous union that he was with, where union leadership was corrupted. By the way, That's why I'm so much for co-ops. But anyway, at the same time, he sees what Amazon is doing in terms of threatening to take away certain things if they decided to organize. He did talk about having to carry pee bottles when driving because he doesn't have time to go to McDonald's to use the bathroom, and that they keep them on a tight schedule. Yep, I heard that too. This might explain why the second facility, LD5, did not unionize because of concerns, as he said. Not to mention the fact a lot of part-timers work in LD5. So when you're part-time, you don't treat the job as serious as your full-time job. As far as you're concerned, you could take it or leave it. Amen to what Kim Brown said Sunday about getting it done at the state and local level. I put that out there for the past year. You want to see it done, then get it done at the state and local level first. Sabs speak into the ether and it would eventually proliferate. Glad to see more getting on board with this idea. That's right, Roger. You were one of the first ones to mention that. Watching Cynthia on Rewind, hearing her talk about we have to find a new way of governing because the way we're doing it isn't working, sounds like she's talking about direct democracy and U.S. voters having a direct say-so in our government now. She's speaking my language. Sounds like she wants ballot initiatives. It's like I just said before, you speak into the ether, the abyss, it'll eventually speak back. I thought I missed your show yesterday because I was on Zoom with 3 congressional candidates, a gubernatorial and lieutenant gubernatorial candidate, and one running for New York Senate, not U.S. Senate. I personally didn't like the way the hosts were conducting it because they didn't want us to ask the candidates questions directly by speaking to them, but to put them in a chat. I don't know whether this had something to do with when I went off on Chuck a couple of months ago because he knew some of them personally. He probably was like, let this crazy Negro in the door. Y'all better fix this pronto. My point is, we can't be running a protection racket here. It got me thinking how complicit we are in this merry-go-round. Think about this for a sec. Progressive activists tossing progressive candidates into the Democratic Party, expecting them to flip it, is as inhumane as our part as tossing them into a swamp full of alligators, expecting them to come out with bags and shoes made from alligator skins. We throw them in there just to get torn to pieces, then get mad when we don't have our bags. Our expectations cause us to be worse abusers than the federal Democratic Party itself. As I said, it could be different with your state and local Dems. We've state and local Dems here who made AOC look like Lindsay. Still, I'm always testing them and pushing the envelope with them. The ultimate is if I could get them to put forth a constitutional amendment before the U.S. before us to ratify, to allow us to pass laws and amendments for our state through the BI process with no big money hijack. CSAB, even Reed said after Bernie, the movement didn't die. It caused us to activate like the Wonder Twins. We might even be broken up into different fractions, but we are still here. You can't kill energy. It only transforms. Yes, Reed, down with the BIs. Also, is Reed your uncle or something? I couldn't help but notice a family resemblance with your faces right next to each other. Nose, eyes, shape of mouth. What? I don't know about that, Roger. He is using fear of the GOP, which is true of what he says, as if the Dems are not going to do the same. Either way, you still get GOP policy. Yes, SCOTUS wants to obliterate the administrative state, and there goes meat inspection. But this is why I say you can get these things done at the state level. Fed pays EPA. New York State has Department of Environmental Protection. Fed pays CFPB. New York State has Department of Financial Services. Ask Dr. Oh, sorry, this is no longer Roger. Thank you for those, Roger. Thank you for this tip, Troy Z and KC. I'm sorry I missed this. Ask Dr. Reed about the wording in the 13th Amendment saying abolish slavery except for punishment for crimes. Then ask him about prison leasing of prisoners to work for peanuts or nothing. I'm sorry I missed that. Thanks for this as well. As per MMT, we need to not cut any other federally funded anything to get federal funding for ending poverty, etc. Thank you for this tip, Roger. The way the police force started in the South makes what you said about its origins true, but it pertains to the North, pertains to what Reed said. Oh, okay. Thanks, Roger. Notice how he mentioned Boston, not a southern city. The American Communist Party, unions and socialists is what was the buildup to FDR. Worker co-ops can mimic what unions did, but better. That's your organizing right there. Worker co-ops can provide the funds to movements. Thank you for that, Roger, and for TC. All right, guys. Thanks so much for hanging out with me tonight. Tomorrow, come back. Savage Joy is going to join me for a little bit. There's another Medicare for All March that has happened in the summer. This time it's just going to be solely in DC. So you'll want to tune in to hear about that. And I'll also have news as well. All right, guys. I hope I did a good job. You guys think I did okay? Let me, why do I have 4 of the windows open? Where all these windows come from? Oh, well. Anywho, yeah, guys, definitely join me tomorrow, 7 o'clock. Should be fun time. You know how we like to do what we do. I do have some more exciting things coming up within the next couple of weeks, so stay tuned for that. All right, guys, thanks so much. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.